market. As co-chair, I am committed to strengthening business participation, ensuring that benefits are shared equitably and all the projects foster transparency and fairness. Our immediate priorities include defining best practices for benefit sharing, ensuring respect for traditional ecological knowledge and customary laws, and removing technical, legal, and financial barriers that often prevent communities from participating fully in the market. Our forum members represent diversity of our cultures, joining from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Oceania, and northern regions to bring grounded perspectives to climate solutions. Together, we aim to build a voluntary carbon market that upholds indigenous rights, values, our knowledge system, and truly supports sustainable development. Thank you very much for the chance to share our perspective.
And I'd like to pass it over to Amy Merrill.
Thanks, and it's really great to be here and to have such a full set of people on the chairs. And this is really, as Fernanda said, this is an event where we're here to answer questions. So if you were counting on checking your emails, eating a sandwich, and having a snooze at the back, I encourage you to, start, just think about the things you'd like to know from all of us here today. So I just want to make sure everybody knows they're in the right room. So I just want to do an acronym check. Who understands what ICVCM is doing? Okay, that's good. Okay, if you're a board member of ICVCM, you can put your hand down. Who understands what VCMI stands for? Okay, good. And GCMU? Okay, good. And Anel has already presented the work of the Engagement Forum, and we're looking forward to questions. So I'll just spend a few minutes. The ICVCM is the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets, and to enable climate finance, carbon finance to flow at scale amounts into community-led projects, into technology projects, and to incentivize corporate action on all emissions, the ICVCM's mission is to create a stable, high, ambitious threshold of integrity on the supply side of the carbon market so that it's an investable product that we can scale for the purpose, as the social purpose of carbon finance and the mitigation purpose of scaled corporate action. We have 10 core carbon principles. Hands up if you know all 10. Okay, board members, you should be putting your hand up. There's 10 core carbon principles. There's one around governance of systems that issue carbon credits. There's one around the transparency of the systems they operate. There's one around the security of registry systems that track and record credits. And there's one around third-party verification. And those ones address governance systems that are used to issue carbon credits. And then there's 3 that look at how you measure carbon credit action in a project under what we call methodologies. Hands up if you know what methodology is. Okay, good. You see where this is going. You're not going to get to eat that sandwich, right? And then, so we have one on emissions. So making sure that the actual credit is measured effectively. We have one on robust quantification, steps around designing systems to ensure that counting is done properly. And we have one on permanence. Sorry, emissions impact is the bracket of these 3. We have one on permanence, making sure we're managing reversal risks in projects and methodologies where there is a risk of reversal. And we have rules around avoiding double counting, double claiming. We also have 2 really, really important CCPs. One that addresses social safeguards and environmental safeguards. So things like looking at risk in projects for pollution, looking at human rights issues, looking at FPIC, mainstreaming all those really important SDG rights into project design and delivery. And we also have a core carbon principle that relates to ensuring that projects and methodologies are designed in a way that brings support to countries delivering towards net zero targets, and only incentivizing those carbon crediting systems that enable overall delivery towards the global goals of the Paris Agreement. So we've been working on the assessment process after the rules were delivered in 2020, published in 2023. We're right now in the heart of assessing existing methodologies being used by existing projects in the market. We have a double tick system. If you are a carbon credit program issuing carbon credits that is robustly and well governed, you can get ticked as eligible, right? And only carbon crediting programs that are robustly governed will be eligible under what we call the CCP label. And then methodologies that are operated by those programs that robustly meet all the requirements of core carbon principles can be approved by our independent governing board on the advice, supported by the advice of our independent expert panel. And then those credits can be labeled CCP. And the purpose of this is to enable investors and buyers to move back into the market with confidence around the comparability and quality of carbon credits in the independent crediting space, to enable scaled back into the carbon markets, where every methodology is robustly and robustly delivered, robustly implemented, and well understood as having high integrity by the entire market. So that's what we're doing. We're really happy to address your questions, and I'm going to pass over to Mark to talk about the work that VCMI is doing.
Thank you, Amy. And many of you put your hands up saying you know what VCMI is. So I am not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but we are the demand side of the voluntary carbon market. We are here to help scale the market with integrity. And that broadly means, and without going into a huge amount of detail, following the mitigation hierarchy, recognizing that carbon credits are a complement or a supplement or whatever word you want to use to decarbonization efforts. That if we think about, if you've read the UNEP emissions gap report, you will recognize that we can't afford to say, well, we're going to do this now, and then we'll do something else a bit later. We need all of the above today, tomorrow, and the next day. And therefore, while we want to build integrity into the market, because that will help give companies confidence, will give their shareholders confidence and their stakeholders confidence, it is also a way to scale the market, because we know that financing for climate action is in short supply. Much as I would welcome my government levying a bit more income tax on me to pay money for climate finance, that's not a vote winner at the moment, as many as you will have recognized. So we need the private sector to stand up, but the private sector needs to have an ROI. And that's why I just want to congratulate Natura again, for being brave, because this is a market, this is a world that has suffered a lot of criticism over the last 2 or 3 years. So to be a company and say, in face of all this criticism, not only have we reduced our emissions internally, which, by the way, is not that easy, as I'm sure Fernando will tell you. It's not just we tick a box. You actually have to invest. You have to make difficult choices. So reducing your emissions for scopes 1, 2, and 3 is difficult. To then go above and beyond by offsetting, reducing, eliminating, compensating all your remaining emissions with high-quality carbon credits that meet the criteria of the ICVCM, that's real leadership. And I think it should be recognized as such. At the moment, as many of you will know, the market is stagnant. Companies, many of whom would like to get into the market, are waiting. They're stepping back. They're not sure they can do it. Are they going to be criticized? Are they going to be criticized for doing something that is a clear sign of leadership? It's a slightly odd place for us to be in. So if we want to bring that confidence back to the market, I think we need to bring 3 or 4 things into play. One, organizations that are setting standards for companies, setting targets for companies, setting transition frameworks, need to recognize that corporate action is both within their value chain and outside the value chain. But have the ability and the responsibility to take action across the whole of the scope of their scopes and outside. And that's where carbon credits, high quality carbon credits, can come into play. So target setters, standard setting organizations need to recognize that, need to value it. Doesn't mean all actions are treated or accounted for in exactly the same way. You have to have transparent disclosure and accounting, and that is what companies like Natura have done. They haven't pretended that their carbon credits are the same as their internal investments. They've disclosed and reported them separately, been recognized as such, and are proud of it, and so we should be. So one, target setters and standing setting organizations. Second, to use language from advertising from fund managers, past performance is not an indicator of the future. Just because credits and projects 10, 15 years ago may not be considered fit for purpose now, there's been a reform agenda. You've just heard from Amy talking about how we're really injecting robustness, transparency, and diversity of participation, inclusive participation into the market. So don't criticize now from what happened 15 years ago. Look at what's happening now. And that's to my friends and colleagues in the NGO community, in the media and elsewhere. Look at what we're doing now and judge us on that. Third, governments need to recognize there's a role for regulation. This is not, it's in addition to creating compliance and policies across the economy. Obviously, in 2024, 36 years after we started climate negotiations, there is no excuse for any sensible country not to have economy-wide policies. But not all our countries, sadly, are sensible. So what governments can do is provide regulation that provides certainty for companies, that provides harmonization across jurisdictions, that gives companies the confidence that they are doing the right thing and will be recognized as such. And finally, to come back to Natura, we need companies to be brave. And I can see some of you here in the room looking at your telephones and your computers trying to ignore me. You need to step up. You need to reduce your emissions. You need to buy carbon credits, and you need to make carbon integrity claims. And if you can't meet your targets, say so and buy carbon credits to bridge the gap and accept responsibility. Show how you're investing and getting back on track, because then you're not only supporting your own innovation and your own emissions reductions, but you're contributing to global net zero, which is, after all, why 63,000 of us are here today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Please, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Chris Canavan, the CEO of the Global Carbon Market Utility. The GCMU, I think the fewest hands went up when Amy asked if you recognize the acronym. So let me give you a 30-second description of what it is we're trying to do. If ICVCM is successful, which I expect it will be, and VCMI is successful, which again I expect it will be, we will need a marketplace that is robust enough and has enough integrity in the marketplace itself to be able to support the scaling up that we need this market to experience in order to have the climate impact, which is, after all, what we are all here for. And that's where we would like to step in. We'd like to step in to help build a marketplace that is robust enough to be able to withstand the volume, maintain the integrity, and maintain integrity not just on the supply side and the demand side, but of the way the marketplace works. That means data standards with integrity, contractual terms with integrity, taxonomies with integrity, all with very high standards of transparency. And that requires infrastructure, that requires market infrastructure that needs to be built and operate like a utility and provide all of the public goods that any well-functioning, deep and liquid market has or benefits from. And so that is what we're trying to do. There are many actors, many of you are in the room, who are providing parts of this infrastructure, but what we need to do is make sure that we bring it all together, fill the gaps that are missing, and enclose the marketplace with infrastructure that is robust enough to withstand the regulation that would be on the way and which would be welcome, and enforce all of the standards that ICVCM is putting forth, that VCMI is putting forth, and that others of you in the room are helping to define. So that is, in a nutshell, the GCMU, and I very much welcome questions and comments from the rest of you.
Thank you, Chris. Onel, I'm back to you. If you could ask your first question for us, please.
Sí, sería, bueno, para que un mercado voluntario de carbono de alta integridad tenga éxito, debe respetar e incluir los derechos y contribuciones de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Desde sus perspectivas, en la ICVCM, la VCMI y la GCMU, ¿qué medidas concretas podemos tomar para garantizar que desempeñamos un papel central en la configuración del mercado. Nos beneficiamos equitativamente de su desarrollo y vemos protecciones reales de los derechos de los sobre la tierra integradas en la estructura del mercado.
Your proposed question to Amy, Mark, and Chris on the panel. For a high integrity voluntary carbon market to succeed, it must respect and include the rights and contributions of indigenous people and local communities. From our perspective, at the Integrity Council Voluntary Carbon Market, the Voluntary Carbon Market Initiative, and the Global Carbon Market Unit Utility, what concrete steps can we take to ensure we play a central role in shaping the market, benefit equitably from its development, and see real protections for land rights integrated into the market structure?
I'll start, shall I? So one of the things that, as Anel explained, the engagement forum was set up to make sure that there is a place from which to hear very clearly voices from indigenous communities in the context of every aspect of carbon markets. Strategic vision, actual implementation, enabling scaled action. In the ICVCM assessment framework, the core carbon principle around social safeguards and sustainable development contains about 30 specific rules about the way that methodologies have to be designed and projects have to be designed to review risks, look at benefits, and manage and report. And so that particular core carbon principle, when it was adopted in 2023, was a major step up for the entire voluntary carbon market, where there wasn't really a perception that every kind of project needed to go through really, really careful SDG analysis, FPIC analysis, and really stakeholder engagement that was actually real, meaningful, long-term, and properly best practice. One of the things that we learned in the ICVCM when designing that rule was that there was a really great variability in the existing market. And we had to set the benchmark at a place where you could actually expect new projects to be designed that could meet those rules, could actually build them in, and have systems that could change the way that existing projects reported and managed risk going forward. And everybody came away from that exercise thinking, wow, we've really started to set that frame, but it's a start, and the next step is another journey. And so one of the first work programs for thought leadership that the ICVCM started was on strengthening social safeguards and environmental protections within the assessment framework. And that work went through 2023. So that work, the result of that collective stakeholder-led work will be published in 2025. Meanwhile, since the engagement forum was set up, the engagement forum will also help ICVCM design the next version of the rules and review and input into those rules so that the next version has the benefit of all the collective knowledge that has come from stakeholders in the market, particularly indigenous peoples and local communities, into that set of rules since they were developed. So it's really a very concrete set of steps towards a really rights-based design for carbon markets. And if people have specific expertise in relation to those issues, we are constantly recruiting into those thought leadership programs and constantly looking for ways to get more perspectives on experience, particularly like real experiences of how to do things well and where things went wrong. And so, stakeholder interaction is this other piece of work where we're constantly listening to get that feedback. And so that's how the ICVCM works. And the other thing that I think perhaps useful to understand is that the engagement forum is, as we know, independent and separate from ICVCM, and supported in its work by the ICVCM, particularly through 3 board members who are Indigenous Peoples board members of the ICVCM, and who through a subcommittee help create sort of that strategic visionary link between ICVCM and the Engagement Forum. So we're really trying to show the way for actually getting this next version of the carbon market right from the start.
Mark.
Said it all.
I just said it all, I'm sorry.
No.
And just to complement that, and to be very concrete about it, what we need is for a company to be able to pay, let's say, $50 a ton, and for as much of those $50 to make it back to those who are responsible for the project, those who are responsible for maintaining the project, all of the communities whose support for these projects is critical. Otherwise, these projects falter and don't deliver on the promise. And our part in doing that is making sure that the marketplace itself is transparent enough and efficient enough so that the intermediaries who stand in the way of the $50 getting back to local communities have no excuse but to take as little off of that to pay for the efforts that they need to contribute into it as possible, so that as much of the $50 makes it back to where the activity, the real activity occurs. And so that's why it's so important for us to build the infrastructure of this marketplace that can deliver that transparency and can deliver that efficiency, and will make the amount that gets skimmed off the top as small as possible in an efficient market.
Thank you, Chris. Now I'd like to pass through you. If you'd like to ask your question, please raise your hand and our team will pass you the mic here. Okay. Please introduce yourself and your institution, please. I'm not hearing.
Hi. It's perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you for this interesting discussion. I'm Sebastian Lema. I work as Carbon Markets Director at the Center for Cleaner Policy. And we have working during the last year on the benefit sharing for RED Plus projects. And one of the a key aspect that we consider should be addressed is transparency on benefit sharing. And probably this is like a question for Chris. Do you think that is necessary to provide transparent information to all the different stakeholders in the markets about how much or what percentage of the projects are going back to the local communities? And also, in addition to that, to provide transparent information on what are the prices that the carbon credits are being traded?
I certainly think that the market should be established and run so that there is absolutely as much transparency, both about the distribution of goods and about prices, right? Every other market, in fact, works on the basis of that kind of transparency and that kind of disclosure. What exactly those disclosure requirements look like, those accounting standards look like, those are still questions that are being defined, including by different stakeholders in this market. But from our point of view, what we're trying to do is help provide public goods, including supporting the public good of transparent data, transparency in terms of transactions, so that everyone who is involved in this market feels that they know enough to be able to conclude that this is a fair market, a just market, and an efficient market.
Just to add something, I mean, I think we need to remember that this is a public purpose market. It exists only to drive finance for emissions reductions, removals, and sustainable development. And therefore, arguments that information should not be in the public domain should only rest on if there is a public purpose for not disclosing. So you might say there's a community that's receiving some benefits and therefore they might be vulnerable. So you don't want to say where that community is. But information about prices and profit margins and benefit sharing and all the rest, there is no public purpose not to make that public. So I think the presumption should be every single bit of information is in the public domain in an accessible format in real time, unless there is a public purpose reason not to. And I think if we start from that, then we presume transparency rather than presume secrecy and confidentiality.
So if we agree that it's necessary to provide that transparent on information, what is not happening yet? Probably that would be like the interesting.
Well, I think it's partly because precedent, and there's always been this assumption that it has to be secretive and there are commercial confidentiality, but it's also not happening yet because some brokers, suppliers of carbon credits are buying them at a few dollars and selling them at quite a lot of dollars, and therefore they don't want the public to know that, and that's caused distrust. There have been reports in the last couple of years looking at where the margins go, who's making what, and it doesn't make for pretty reading. And so transparency is absolutely essential to build trust, but also to make sure that when benefits are said to be shared, they actually are shared.
Sí, yo creo que la parte esencial es lo que tenemos que asegurar es de la distribución justa y equitativa de los beneficios de productos del mercado de carbono para los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, teniendo presente que los bosques están en nuestros territorios.
I want to emphasize that it's very important to ensure distribution in an equitative manner about the voluntary carbon market to indigenous people. We need to think about our forests and our lands.
Your question, please. And then.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? So, hi, great speech. So I'm Alex Cox, I work for ERM, we're a sustainability consultancy and head of the carbon markets. I think your points about an efficient market are great. From our perspective, from a private sector perspective, there's a lot of money wanting to be deployed, more money going into projects. There has to be a sensible ROI. We want as much money to go back to the communities, absolutely. But there needs to be, at the moment, it's a low return, high risk sector. It's not attracting finance. So you need insurance products, you're going to need government underwriting it, you need off-take agreements with solid pricing in the future. And it's all got to come together both from an event like this and hopefully elsewhere at the country level and private sector initiatives. So I think you're right, we need that, but we also need stability and certainty for finance sector.
Thanks, and I'll start. So some of the work of ICVCM and VCMI is working with regulators across the life cycle of carbon credits supply, design, supply, transaction, and use to help get regulators to understand how they can incentivize action and ensure stability in transactions and ensure investability in markets by endorsing systems, by setting out principles. So you might have seen last year the US agencies talked about what their principles for high integrity markets look like. You'll have seen that there have been other announcements, some more expected, where governments are being quite clear about the kind of voluntary markets they wish to support, endorse, or create a safe harbor around. So that also helps lower risk, right? Because corporates can then act in knowing that the government of the country they're in recognizes those efforts. We're seeing a lot of disclosure rules, which also help set a framework around what good looks like for corporate behavior. Maybe Mark will talk to that soon as well. And the other thing I think we all just have to get our head around is that, a really high integrity project could be expected to have higher built-in transaction costs that we do need to understand. And we need to also make sure that the revenue and the benefit sharing component, as we talked about, is front and center in that cost profile. So prices need to start to reflect the real cost of the cost of a proper revenue share. The transaction costs need to be covered, and we need to start to accept that in the past, if $5 a ton was a good price, that's not good enough anymore. And so that for this to be able to scale and pass back the benefits in the way it should, everybody needs to understand that has implications for price, and that price increase is representative of getting everything done better. So yeah, I think we're working on many different fronts to try to create that enabling environment with regulators and with stakeholders.
Here we have on the right here, and after you.
Hi, I am Monica from Strategy End. Is it working? Yeah?
Yes.
So I would like to understand what is your view on the role of blockchain and tokenization in delivering high-integrity carbon markets? And whether do you see tokenization of carbon credits as a trend for the future?
I'm not entirely sure why Amy handed me the mic, but I will take a shot at it. I think that the benefits of blockchain are clear, but it's not entirely clear that the problems that blockchain would solve are problems that we need to solve in the immediate future. There are many obstacles in the way towards scaling up an efficient and just market, and whether or not the information is centralized or decentralized may not be the most important problem we have to solve now. That's my personal view, based on probably less understanding of how distributed ledgers work than I should have. But I do think that we've got some very immediate problems to solve and some obstacles to get out of the way in order to make sure that we can achieve liftoff and get scale in this market.
Perfect. Any other thoughts? No? Okay, so maybe here. Thank you.
Hi, this is Manoj from Net Zero Think. So my question is, like for high integrity carbon credits, what should be the minimum, clearance price, and what should be minimum floor price and ceiling price? Because if you are developing high integrity, projects, so definitely it involves lots of cost. So what should be the range, like which should be globally accepted, not like in any country like EU and all, they have different, range of credit buying. In other country like Asia, India, credit rates are very less. Even the technology-wise, the rates are very, very low. Conventional renewable energy technology rates are very low. Biochar and all, it's on higher side. So what should be the, minimum bracket for those, rates? Because ultimately we are going for carbon credit to support, removal and reduction. And if you look at the technology cost of removal and reduction, it's very high. It's approx $150 to $200 per ton. Yeah. So there should be some benchmark, because you are talking about coming up with global framework. So I think this should be also considered. Then only things will evolve, and people will come forward to come up with the projects and all. Yeah. So just I would like to understand your views onto that.
So maybe I just come in super quickly. What do you think the range should be?
Yeah,
what do you think it should be?
Removal cost.
The removal cost.
Yeah.
So what we hear is that we hear lots of different things. We hear that the lowest price is not good enough right now to cover cost of a really high integrity market. So I think, probably everybody can agree that some of the prices the market have seen in the past are nowhere near enough to give a decent revenue share and barely cover costs. So, we also hear there are groups of stakeholders who engage with ICVCM who say, can ICVCM help deliver a floor price? And it's one of the things that we'll look at in the future. Is there a way to coalesce everyone around? Yeah, we won't actually engage in sales and purchases where people are trying to sell or purchase for below. Well, people don't try and sell for below, right? But buyers are pushing prices down. So that's an area of work that ICVCM could look at taking on. The other thing we hear is that it's still important to understand the different capital expenditure profiles at the start of a project, depending on the type of project it is. And the usual example there is technical removals have a higher upfront capex cost, and actually the cost cycle for those types of carbon projects isn't representative. You wouldn't see that play out in other sectors. So the other thing we hear is that prices all need to be higher, but they're not necessarily still, suddenly all going to become the same, and that buyer preferences, costs are still going to be different. So, I think I just agree with you. There's a discussion to be had in the future about what a reasonable price range, so that revenue sharing is meaningful and costs are covered effectively, that discussion needs to come, and we need to start to move the market towards an understanding that high quality and high integrity has costs and reflects reflects a market that's moved towards a solid product.
I just want to add one thing, and it was what Amy said at the end about so that there can be adequate benefit sharing, etc. I am personally not so concerned about the price per se. I just want to make sure that there's a minimum floor for how much benefit is generated, how that benefit is shared, how much additional indirect non-carbon benefits there are. And obviously, if you're buying a ton of carbon at $1.50 and you're expecting to have high quality verification and validation and all the rest of it, you've got to wonder how good that's going to be. So I think there should be a proper understanding of how much it costs to do those things properly, how much it costs not to do a trivial FPIC exercise, but really involve the local community in design, management, governance of the project. Those things cost money. So it's partly about transparency, so people really understand how much these things cost properly, and then the price will be driven by supply and demand in the end. But I think it's the floor on some of the costs rather than the price itself I'd go for.
Yeah, so see, the thing we are talking about carbon market to remove, a carbon dioxide from atmosphere. Already we are 37 gigaton, CO2 right now. So this 37 gigaton CO2 we are, producing every year, and equivalent if you look at around 57 gigaton, all GHG emissions. So what can be done, to reduce that? We are talking about net zero. Net zero will happen when this number will come down. Okay? So for that, what should be the price? Because polluters are polluting and they're buying, credits at very low rate. So you need to think about how the, system should work so that, actual emissions, is going to reduce. And for that, funding is needed. If I am going to put offshore wind, if I am going to put new technologies, carbon capture, funding is needed. Funding will come once, you have system in a place so that, the money will be transferred here for new technologies and all.
No. He wants to.
Hi, Julian Hall from Climate Impact X. In a natural market, price is driven by supply and demand. And what we believe is that complexity in pricing will remain in this market because not just do you have different fundamentals at credit type level, but even at project level. And beyond that, even in an Article 6 world, you have different countries putting in place different specs for qualifying credits for their own countries. So at the end of the day, the complexity will remain, but it will still ultimately be that every asset will be driven by supply and demand for that asset. That is a natural market. I think it's very hard to talk about floor prices without risking going against the fundamentals of what it is to build a market. In other markets, however, tools have emerged to manage that price risk. And I think that's where we want to arrive at is, so project benefit sharing tools, such as indexation to the price of that asset, which share a fair percentage to the communities as one tool. And then price management tools like hedging that allow investors in projects and developers to lock in their price at a certain price and actually to become price agnostic, to actually manage with a scalpel very precisely their price risk. We're very far from that, unfortunately, but we believe that that's the long-term destination for this market. And we at Climate Impact X are pretty determined to help facilitate that journey. Enough talk, in our view, about the need for hedging and how we get there. I think that is a really critical tool in helping the market to be better managed against price volatility.
I agree with that view. I think that the very next obstacle we need to remove in order to move along the path that you've laid out is whatever gets in the way of fungibility in this market. We need to the extent possible, this market to be a single homogeneous market rather than hundreds, if not thousands, of little micro markets where the buyer has much more bargaining power because the seller is not competing in a homogeneous market. If we can get there, if we can get to some modicum of fungibility, then this is a true market that is trading a set of goods that do have complexity. It's not the first market that's ever emerged in the world that has to deal with complexity. But if we arrive there, then it becomes much easier to think about hedging strategies and portfolio strategies and all of the instruments and tools that you're referring to.
There is another question there.
Hello, Marion Verle from SustainCert. We're a digitally enabled validation verification body. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I have two questions. One to the gentleman from GCMU. Sorry, I cannot read your name on the screen.
Chris.
Chris. I'd love to understand a little bit better how GCMU differs or is similar to existing trading platforms that we have in the market. It's not fully clear to me what would be the difference or the overlap with the other sort of trading platform providers or exchanges. And then a question to Mark. Can we go back to the conversation on the demand side and how to get corporates to be recognized for buying carbon credits? I'd love to hear your perspective on where the Science-Based Target Initiative is with that, the latest corporate net zero standards developments with the publications we had this summer. Do you think it's going in the right direction? Would you be happy with environmental attribute certificates being recognized, including carbon credits? Or would you like to see them take a different approach? I'd love to hear your take as much as you can share. And from there, how are you engaging with their process? I expect there will be a consultation coming up in January. Is this something that VCMI will take part in? And what is your ultimate sort of objective, that your recommendation, VCMI's recommendation, end up being taken on by SBTI so that you can focus on other challenges to solve? Or do you see a world where SBTI and VCMI recommendations would live in parallel side by side and possibly propose different approaches to what corporates should do?
Thank you. Chris?
I got the shorter question. Thank you. How does GCMU interact with exchanges and other trading platforms? Our view is that if we are successful, they will be much more successful than they have been, and hopefully others will be encouraged to enter into this market and contribute to the scaling up and transparency and efficiency of the market. What we believe is missing in this market is the basic utility function that exists in every other financial market that I know of that is large and liquid. The basic underlying rails or plumbing, if you will, which is very boring business, heavily regulated, and we invite that regulation because we feel that once we've built infrastructure that is well regulated, it'll inspire more confidence. Not expected to generate an ROI for its shareholders, whoever they may be, but providing essentially a set of public goods of transparency, standardization, so that the market can in fact scale up. So we're looking to fill that gap that is the gap where there's a utility, it provides essentially a public good, and all of the other actors in this market, including exchanges and marketplaces, can enter and profit.
Good. So on the demand side, I am not going to comment specifically on the ins and outs of SBTI. The people from SBTI here, they can speak to that. They've got good processes and they'll deal with that. What I did say at the beginning was we need organizations, whether they be governments or non-governments, that set targets or standards or frameworks for corporate climate transitions to recognize that purchase and retirement of high quality, high integrity carbon credits is part of a corporate journey. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, because while in all the textbooks, decarbonization follows a nice straight line, anyone who works in a company or with a company knows that that's not the case. Technology adoption is lumpy, costs are lumpy, external circumstances change, energy costs go up, energy costs go down, foreign exchange prices change, etc., etc. So, like in everything else, it's not straightforward. And so, one reason that companies might use carbon credits is to, when they have to go off track a bit for reasons beyond their control, rather than just saying, it's not in my control, I'll do nothing, use carbon credits to bridge the gap. They can use carbon credits, as Natura has done, to go above and beyond. But it may be the case, and I can't, Fernando can talk to this, but at some point in 10 years' time, there may be a point where the next process change is difficult, and therefore they say, well, we're going to use carbon credits on a short term to keep on track while we invest in the next stage of our decarbonization. Then there will be companies for whom it really is just too difficult or too expensive at the moment. And, why would you say to them, do nothing rather than invest in carbon credits? And I mentioned in the Scope 3 proposal that we've just consulted on, that we expect companies not just to buy cheap credits and say, we're okay. No, first you have to count them differently. But second, we're asking companies to say, why have you not been able to meet your targets or be on track for the targets? That's part of that transparency process, because there are very often legitimate reasons, and that will, given the focus on transparency and disclosure that we all have, that will be something in the public domain. So if a company says, I couldn't meet my Scope 3 target because I only ever travel first class and I'm not prepared to travel business class, then they probably will be given a hard time in public. But if it's because there isn't a technology yet, or the technology is not available for 2 or 3 years, and they can show that they're investing in R&D, then I would expect any grown-up, sensible person to say, yeah, that makes sense, and good for them for taking responsibility by cutting or removing emissions elsewhere. So I believe, and I think this is the governments and target setters to provide regulation and frameworks that recognize that using credits as part of a corporate journey, corporate climate transition journey, is a sign of leadership, not a sign of laggardship. And if you do report it transparently, you're demonstrating you're investing. And all of the frameworks, whether it's SBTI or ours or anything else, require companies to demonstrate what they are doing. And just one final point. I think some of the criticism often of companies that use carbon credits to bridge a gap or to meet some part of their targets is based on an assumption that meeting targets to reduce your emissions by 40 to 50% in 10 to 12 years for scopes 1 and 2 or scopes 1, 2 and 3 is somehow easy. Ask Fernanda, ask any of the companies in the room whether that's easy or not. So a company that's going as far as it possibly can and then is taking responsibility for its emissions should be championed and cheered for, not being accused of doing the wrong thing.
She wants to add another topic. Yes, yes.
Are we making progress? I think yes and no, depending on which question you're answering. So are we having lots of companies standing up and making public claims about their carbon credits? Not nearly as much as I would have hoped. And that's why companies like Natura really need to be applauded for what they're doing. However, we do know that companies, I think we're at an inflection point that more companies are saying, yes, actually, we need to look at this. I had a conversation with a company this morning who will remain nameless, who you would assume wouldn't touch carbon credits with a barge pole. I want to talk about it. They said to me, can you help us think through a strategy where we use carbon credits, that we can communicate about it, and it's a sign of leadership? That's more and more the case. And they find, sorry, just one moment. And then they find that guidance like the guidance that VCMI produces, the rules on high quality carbon credits that ICVCM produces are something that can give them confidence, because developed through international multi-stakeholder processes. They have inclusive participation at the governance level rather than just downstream. And so they can say, okay, we can see that there's something here, and sustained cert is actually part of that. Gives us confidence that things are being done properly.
Another question here. from here. Here.
Nicholas, can you hear? Yeah.
Yeah.
Nicholas Toll from DSM Firmenich. And I suppose we're at We Mean Business, so I want to represent business as a potential buyer. And I suppose it builds a little bit on Marion's question. Is that, to be frank, I have a registry account with a few 100,000 credits sitting in them, but I cannot retire them because no cost center in the business is willing to take the charge because they are not useful to any business function in the business. And they become useful when they can go in my inventory. They become useful when I can put them in my science-based targets, and they become very, very useful when I can pass the benefits on to my customers through the product carbon footprint, which I cannot do today. So what work is being done to ensure they become useful as opposed to the business case being, well, it's the right thing to do?
I mean, I think this goes to the heart of implicit in several questions here. If you ask me, do I believe that companies should be able to use carbon credits as part of achieving some set of target or transition journey? Then I would say yes, because that is one of the big ROIs. I mean, we know that the last 5 or 10% of your emission reductions to meet any target are sometimes eye-wateringly expensive, if not sometimes impossible. So one ROI would be you're reducing the cost of compliance. I don't think you should include it in your inventory as if it were one of your own emissions. You need to be transparent about how you count and account for it. But if, we in our Scope 3 guidance, we suggest that companies should be able to use carbon credits for up to 24% of their required target. And that is likely, I would imagine, to mean a cost reduction for you. And so our expectation is that, one, companies will be able to go further because it's cheaper, and the companies that at the moment are terrified of taking on any kind of commitment at all will do so because they see it's manageable. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been able to say, well, there's huge reputational benefit from doing this because you would get A, B, and C, and your NGO stakeholders would cheer you, and your customers would think, yes, you're better. Sadly, that's not the case at the moment. We need to rebuild that. And then I think there's a third piece, which is to do with government regulation and incentives. So one is including it in emerging regulatory and compliance regimes, but the other is recognizing governments saying, okay, what incentives can we provide for companies to go above and beyond? Because you're right, if there isn't an ROI, none of your cost centers are going to want to pay for it.
Care. Yeah, and perhaps just to close, because I'm conscious we're a bit over time, if you take this back up to the level of the place where we're in, the parties under the Paris Agreement agreed that using the trading rules under Article 6 that were developed, transactions of it most count towards NDCs. So countries have set up their own system to understand how to allow carbon credits to be used between countries for obligations. We need a system that works within the corporate frame set up by regulators, set up by, where the demand incentive is recognized as part of the decarbonization journey. So we need to remember that we've said yes to this at the international level under the rules that have been spent getting them to work. And so, at the same token, corporates need to be enabled to count their efforts of decarbonization, all their efforts, in a way that is aligned to those frameworks.
Thank you. We are almost finishing. I'd like to add some comment related to Natura. For example, we are buying credits, combining with our strategy to avoid the deforestation at the Amazon region. So we are preventing some supply risks for our value chain. So it's a kind of combination between the frameworks, all the perspectives, and your business. So you need to look for your business to see the best strategies for you, for your choices. Thank you, everybody. We are very aware about the challenge and all the things that we are facing, but we need to start this journey delivering results, and we appreciate you being here and to open to these discussions. Thanks for the audience. It was very important, your questions, to help us to have a good event. Thank you, guys. Have a nice day.